All right, I think we're ready to get started. Thank you again for coming to Best Practices for Webcasting Excellence. My name is Adam Goodrich, and I'm part of the leadership team with the Board of Cooperative Ministries. We're very thrilled about the response to this first ever virtual leadership conference with over 130 Moravians from at least 62 different churches or agencies being registered from 3 different provinces as well. So it's also not too late to tell friends and ministry colleagues to register by visiting moravianbcm.org, as this conference still runs through the 13th of March. We're especially glad that this year's conference is an interprovincial event co-hosted by the Board of Cooperative Ministries and the Healthier Congregations Task Force. So everyone is currently muted, but you will have an opportunity to share soon. So if you have comments or questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box. Our presenters today are the Reverend John Jackman, Moravian pastor at Trinity Moravian Church in Winston-Salem, and filmmaker Mike Riess, executive director of the Interprovincial Board of Communications. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you now.
All right. Well, actually, the filmmaker was supposed to go with John, not with me. John's the filmmaker. I dabble, but I'm not very good at it. John is actually an accomplished producer and director and filmmaker. And hopefully you've seen some of his pieces throughout the years. Good afternoon, all. It's good to see you all. As I said, I'm looking around the screen here, and many of you I know, many of you I've worked with before. And so John and I are going to work through a couple of things today, talking about improving your webcasting experience for your congregation and for the world, for that matter. But what we're going to try to do is open as much time as we can for questions later on, so that we'll have an opportunity for you to ask either some specific things or we can help with some problems that you might be having, or provide some ideas. So we're going to start off with just a couple of thoughts about webcasting. And let me just share my screen here. All right. It's a whole new world out there right now. Webcasting has changed so much. If you think about it, this weekend last year was probably the first time anyone thought, oh my goodness, we have to figure out a way to reach our congregation because we're not going to be in church. Yes, it's been a whole year, and it's quite striking. But I joke that all of our pastors have become televangelists over the last year. It's quite amazing to see all of the different forms of worship that have been happening. Everything from speaking into a cell phone to a multi-camera shoot. It's pretty amazing to see how our congregations have come together. What we're finding, though, is we're moving from we're streaming, just period, to we want to be streaming better. When you're doing your live stream, it needs to look good, it needs to sound good, it needs to use solid visuals, needs to flow well, and it needs to engage your viewers. So we've gone past again, talking into a cell phone kind of streaming, into finding ways to really engage with the people that you're trying to reach. When you're thinking about live streaming, you need to take a strategic view of how you do it. So ask the big question, why are we doing this? What's the reason for us to be streaming right now? What does this do for our ministry? It's more than just putting it out there. What is it doing for your ministry? Is this to connect with our congregants, or is this to invite new people in, or both? Is this a way to expand your reach? We're finding a lot of folks are telling us that they're having more people on their live stream than they would actually have in their pews, because they're reaching folks who may have been members before or who are not Moravian. This is a great opportunity to be able to do that. Ask yourself this question: if we weren't stuck at home, would we be doing this? Is this something that we would still want to do? And are we committed to making it better? So as you're thinking about moving sort of to the next step, are we committed to making it better? Do you have the budget to do it? This is something that popped up, for all of us last year, where suddenly we would need to be able to afford new gear or find a way to do things like this. Do we have the resources to continue? We've done it because we've had to be able to reach out. But do we have the resources to continue? Do we have the people? Do we have the money? What do we already have in place that we're able to use? How elaborate do we want to get? I'm part of a number of different Facebook groups of church photographers and of church video producers and things like that. And a lot of what I see are these sort of mega churches where it's mostly about, it almost looks like a concert. So it's more about the worship band and more about the images and the visuals and things like that. That's not really the way we do it. That's not really our worship style. So how elaborate do we want to get? Do we want that big stage show, or do we want to just make sure that we're connecting with our folks? And finally, does our congregation need and want this? A question that you need to ask as you're going forward. Finally, and I have to throw this in here because this is the sort of the role that I've been thrust into this year. Do you have the proper copyright licenses to be able to do that? If you didn't see our presentation earlier this week, John and I, along with Gwyn Michael from the Moravian Music Foundation, did a presentation on making sure that the music and the liturgies that you're sharing in your online worship have the proper licenses. Do you have those? So we know that the technology is advancing rapidly. John has put together a one-sheeter for you with lots of different resources and things like that. I actually have the version that he did about 5 years ago, and the technology differences are striking. There are things you can do today that you couldn't do this time last year with the way technology is advancing. So it's neat. We need to look past the technology and look beyond the nuts and bolts. And what I mean by that is the technology, has a way of taking care of itself. It's how you present. It's how you bring your service to life online that really matters going forward. So as we talk for the rest of today, that's what we really want to focus on, is how do we make what we're putting out over the, essentially not over the airwaves, because no one really broadcasts anymore, but we're putting out over the wires. How do we make it better? How do we make it so that we're really engaging with folks and making it an important part of our ministry?
Thank you, Mike. I'd just like to chime in with that thought about quality and doing things well. To tell you something that I've noticed among the film directors and a lot of artists that I know, and that is that the ones that are really good at it are never satisfied with what they're doing. And it's that means that they're kind of chronically unsatisfied in life, but they do better every time they go out and try something. At the end of every movie I've done, I wanted to go back and redo it because I'd learned so much along the way that I could have done it better if only, and that's not the way the world works. And of course, really the only person that's ever been able to do that is George Lucas, or George, yeah. But we don't want to go back and fix things from the past. But we do need to try and do better every time and learn as we go forward so that we're improving. And I think that I think back to the title of that devotional book, My Utmost for His Highest. It's like if it's worth doing, I think it's worth doing well. So we need to put some energy and time into. And for many of us, this is something we hadn't even thought of a year ago, and it got dumped on us just all at once. And I helped moderate a group of 16,000 pastors on Facebook, or mostly pastors. Some of them are just seminary graduates who aren't serving parishes anymore. But one of the great common themes over the last year was burnout and misery about having to be a televangelist all of a sudden. And so it's been a hard year for most of us. But I wonder how many, I would bet that most of the people here are actually webcasting their services right now, just because that's how things have played out this year. So I want to throw out a few thoughts that I had that follow up on Mike's presentation. And then Mike said we do want to leave as much time as possible for questions, because those are the things that are going to be specific to your circumstance. And we may not get to all of them, so I'm going to try to follow up in an email with everybody to see if there's stuff that we didn't get to that you needed to hear about. The problem with the technology is that everybody's using something different, and it's really easy for us to get out in the weeds on some specific setup that is totally meaningless to everybody else. So we want to try to avoid that and stay with the common thread in the middle. For a number of years, I did filmmaking workshops for the American Film Institute. And one of the challenges we'd be presented with is we had no idea who the people were that were coming to these. And we'd have workshops that included people who had produced several feature films, all the way down to people who were just thinking about, they got a camera, I wonder if I can do a movie. And it was very hard to do a workshop over a weekend that was going to be satisfactory to all that group. And so I've been through this before, and so we want to focus with your questions when we get to it. So I'm going to share some slides, and yeah, we hope the technology works. Wait a minute here. Well, you know, because we tested this, now I'm on the wrong screen. Hold on a second. All right. Okay. So my question is webcasting important enough to do well? Is this something that we need to put some energy into? If it's not important enough to do well, I would say, why are we doing it? Well, over the last year, we've been doing it out of dire necessity. But going forward, and I mean, one of the points of this whole conference is what kind of blended mode are we going to get into down the road that is the new normal for us? And is that going to include this stuff? And is it going to include it done well? So the question is, what is the point of webcasting your service? The last year, the point has been you didn't have any alternative except maybe to take a risk and let people meet in person. But we've been webcasting at Trinity for, I think it's a little over a decade now. And when we started it, of course, what it was for was it was a resource for the homebound. We used to record audio of the service and burn CDs, and we had a group of people that would go take those CDs of the service to the homebound folks. And this became the new method of that outreach. And we didn't really conceive of it at all as outreach. We started off with 3 surveillance cameras, and it didn't look very good at the outset, but it did satisfy that. Now we are doing several things, and I hope that you're going to be doing these things going forward. We are reaching those at a distance. Just to start with, we have a number of folks at Trinity who have moved to other areas, and they're now associate members at Trinity, but they really feel at home when they worship with us, and they can now worship with us. And some of those could have done that before, but it never occurred to them to tune into the web stream. Now we've got a pretty large group of people that are doing that. We have regained a number of lapsed former members who now are tuning in every week. That's what I hear from other pastors as well, so it's not an uncommon experience. The other thing that the church has resisted a lot is time shifting. And this is something that's been going on since the invention of the VCR. And I'm old enough to have been before that. But one of the first thing with the VCR was that, we could shift the time. We could record something and watch it later. And now our whole society is built around that, the ability to stream at any time you want. And the church has been very resistant to that. We love that 11 o'clock Sunday morning. And even churches that have tried to meet other needs don't generally do very well at it. First thing that we discovered is that we've got a lot of people who are watching our webcast Monday night or Sunday afternoon. but they're working Sunday morning, or they have family activities that they have to take part in. So they're time shifting. And that's a significant number of people. When we watch the web stats of our service, at least a third and often as many as a half are watching later and time shifting. That is now going to be really important. When we did our virtual Christmas Eve love feast, and I don't know what your church did, but we produced a, love feast program with all the hymns and everything that everybody could watch at home. And we gave away bags with candles and love feast buns and a recipe for how to make the coffee at home. And I got to talk to a bunch of people as they came to pick up those bags. And several of them had a time shifting story. One is a police officer who's always on duty Christmas Eve. And he said he hasn't been able to come to a Christmas Eve love feast for years because of that. Now he can time shift it and have it with his family at a time that works with his schedule. So I thought we need to learn that lesson. Reaching new people. The reality today is that your website is the pamphlet for new people, and they are going to watch one of your services online before they come visit physically. It is just the fact. So if your webcast is really boring and poorly done, it actually is going to make them less likely to visit. And that's just a reality that's based on actual surveys of people. So reaching new people. And then there's a whole bunch of completely new dimensions that I don't think we ever thought of before. And I'm just gonna see if I can share a couple of them. One is the possibility for live interaction off site during a service. And I got to say, the best idea I ever had in my entire ministry was what we call the children's chat. Every Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock, I do a Zoom with some of our kids to catch up on their week and do the children's sermon and so on. But then also just chat back and forth. A number of weeks ago, they started telling jokes, and now we have to have jokes every time. And I have to include all the jokes because how do I cut, Bobby's out? But I'm pretty sure we have more people that tune into our webcast to see the children's chat than to see me. But it's a level of interactivity with the kids that is like miles above the normal children's sermon, with sitting up front on the steps. And that's been really interesting. And I'm trying to think how we're going to continue that and what we're going to do with that going forward. We have people, some of the folks who have moved away, some of you know Rachel. Rachel had to move, she took another job, and so she can't come every Sunday. She watches the webcast, but she also reads scriptures for us occasionally. And one of the ideas I'm working on is, what if you have one of your shut-ins that has a 95th birthday? You can actually have a way to have them there in the sanctuary on a screen and sing happy birthday to them. We could never do that before. So yes, it's a little complicated, but I want you to think a bit about what the possibilities of the technology are rather than just, what can we do bare minimum. The planning problems that I see in churches. The first thing is that most churches that got into webcasting kind of accidentally this last year have put zero thought into it. And I don't mean that to be judgmental on pastors, because I know how hard this last year was. This year dropped on us like a bag of bricks. And we didn't have a budget for it. We didn't have staff. And there was no time to train anybody. I came in kind of with an advantage because this is my whole other life. And so I was kind of miles ahead in some ways, but I know this was really rough on people. But what bothers me is I look at churches now that have had a year of doing this and haven't spent any time thinking about why are we doing this? How can we do it better? They're still doing exactly what they did, that first Sunday a year ago. And one of the things related to planning are these questions, and Mike touched on a couple of these. What is this for? What's the point of this? What is the experience of a person who is watching this at home? And you actually have an expert, a resident expert right there. If you can watch your webcast with new eyes and watch it as a viewer and see how incredibly boring parts of it are. And if you can't put those new eyes on, you can recruit somebody else to tell you that'll be really honest with you. But many of these services have huge long dead spots. You can't see what's going on. You haven't thought about the home audience. And I'm going to talk in terms of audience because that's my filmmaking terminology, but you know, your larger congregation at home, you haven't thought about their experience, and you really need to put thought into that experience. And remember that some of those people may be new visitors. This is the new way of visiting for the first time. What kind of experience are they going to have? The other way we ignore the home audience or the home congregation is that we do the church service as if we were in the old, exactly the way we used to do it, talking to everybody in the room and not talking to the people that we know are out there viewing at home. So one of the things that we need to do is to include the home congregation, if you will, to welcome them, to acknowledge that they exist, and to change some of the stuff that we do in the service to acknowledge that they're out there. That actually has a lot of power to it. In our services, we always ask people, you know, if you're on Facebook, please post some comments online. And we always, every week, we have people posting comments. Usually it's not much more than saying hello to each other, but it's a way of letting us know that they're out there. The other thing that I'd like you all to take a look at with your service is how many dead spots there are in it. People, we are trained on professional television. We've all grown up watching $1 million television, and that creates kind of a viewing perception that we have. And so people are actually more impatient with dead spots and dead time watching it on a screen than they are in person. And I think you'll find you are like that too, that if something just doesn't happen for a while, it's like, well, you know, click it off. Our services are full of dead spots. How? Well, okay, we have announcements, and Fred's going to make an announcement now, and I'll sit here. Fred hasn't been paying any attention. He's way in the back of the sanctuary, and it takes a long time for him to notice and then come up front, and we just wait for that. Okay, the children are going to sing now. Well, nobody gave them a cue, and so the children are kind of disorganized in the back, and it takes us 3 to 4 minutes to get them up front to do what they're going to do. Those things can be cured by organization and planning. So those are important things to look at. I mentioned announcements a minute ago. We had, when we started doing this at Trinity, you know, we'd been webcasting for a long time, which is basically we had cameras in the service and we didn't do anything different. But we had a special worship team that got set up to review what we were doing and to make suggestions and to think about the experience of the folks at home. And of course, all of them were now experiencing this at home, so they could, you know, they really had the right eyes on. One of the first things that we did was we moved our announcements from the beginning of the service to the end of the service, because we could see on the web stats that we had a lot of drop off right there during the announcements. And, you know, we did it up front because that's the way it's always been done. We didn't really think much about it. So now we've got announcements at the end, and only the insiders and the true blue, you know, Trinity people are going to stay all the way to the end for the announcements. But we're not going to lose all the new people while we have 5 minutes of announcements. The other thing with announcements is that they're often very insider focused. We talk about, you know, well, Fred's going to do this. See Fred if you're interested. And many people have no idea who Fred is. So we need to have a new visitor kind of mentality explaining things. The other thing that we realized is that for new visitors, especially these days, we have a lot of people who have never attended church or haven't in years, people who have absolutely no background in liturgical churches, which the Moravian Church is. And we do all these weird churchy things, even taking up offering. You know, if you're not a church background person, why are we doing this right now? And we realized we needed to explain some of what we were doing and why we were doing it. Don't take much time to do it, but we are acknowledging that the new folks don't know what a liturgy is. So what's a liturgy? And just take the time to explain why we're doing some of this stuff. I did grab a few examples of poorly done services. Now this is a Catholic service, and so I got to admit that part of the service is the priest coming up and bowing to the altar. But there was just a lot of, all you did was watch the priest walk around very slowly. This is, you know, I mean, this is not really very interesting. Tech issues. This is where we could go get off in the weeds right away, getting into the details on this. But Mike mentioned budget. Most of us had no budget to do any of this a year ago. And I hope now you've developed some kind of budget for what you're going to spend on it. But on the other hand, I'm seeing a lot of churches, especially larger churches, go and throw buckets of money at something and spending way too much money and not solving the problems that they hadn't thought through well. So another thing is lighting. And I'm going to run through the list real quick and then show you some illustrations. Churches are lit like the Batcave. They're terribly lit and in terms of camera work and video. We usually have very bad sound. If you got a camera at the back of the sanctuary, which is what most people seem to do, and the mic's on the camera, what you're recording or what you're webcasting is the echo off the walls, not what the direct sound from the speaker. Being too far away is a common thing, both for the microphone and for the camera. Poor framing. One of the things I noticed, we've got some churches that have really smart IT folks who came in and set up cameras, and they have absolutely no background in photography. And so they will do several things that are wrong with framing of the shot, so that there's, you know, huge amounts of headroom, or it's just not well framed. We need to learn something about framing. And the other thing I'm going to mention here, and I'll be glad to argue with anybody afterwards and won't argue now. You need to be doing it in horizontal landscape mode, not in vertical phone mode. This is among videographers and cinematographers, this is a real sore spot. Somehow we all got used to using our phone like this, but vertical video does not play very well in many venues. If your folks are watching it on home on a computer, it's shrunk down to fit on the screen rather than filling the screen. If they're actually casting the YouTube up on their big screen, once again, it's shrunk down and it's too small. So please do it horizontally. That's the way most of the outlets are designed. If you have access to your web stats, you can actually drill down and find out how many people of your home viewers are watching on a phone versus a computer. And you're going to still find that more than half are watching on a computer, and they can't turn their monitor up vertically. So, okay, I'll get off the soapbox now. Lack of testing. Lack of testing. I cannot tell you how many churches I see that paste this stuff together, this extremely complicated technology, don't even try it until they go live with it. And then it's a disaster. Even Mike and I do this all the time. We still logged on 15 minutes early so we could test if the screen share was going to work right, because sometimes it doesn't, right? So you need to test whatever system you're using, not in the crucial circumstance of 11 o'clock Sunday or 10 o'clock Sunday, or whenever you webcast. You need to test. Another aspect that if you set up a multi-camera setup, it is very difficult to get good shots of the congregation. And there are legal issues with that as well that we'll talk about in a little bit. Let me show you a couple examples of these real quick. Lighting. This is actually a shot from my book on lighting, lighting for digital television, which is now in the 4th edition, and you can buy at Amazon. But this is an illustration we did in the section on specialty video, which is how to do things in churches and other things. On the left, you see fairly typical church lighting, and this is actually better than most church lighting. I don't know, does anybody recognize where this pulpit is? It's kind of hard to recognize in this. This is Unity Moravian Church in Louisville. And the shot on the left with my eyes in deep shadow and so on, and the weird glasses shadows and so on, was after a member who's a lighting person said, I need to add some lights in here, you can't, it's terrible. So he had added a couple of lights, theater lights in the ceiling to improve the lighting. But what we did by adding just one spotlight from the front is we got good lighting for video. And I guarantee that your church needs some auxiliary lighting for you to get good video from the pulpit. So, distance makes a difference with sound and with lighting. This is a diagram from that book, but there's a thing called the inverse square law, that when you get twice as far away from an energy source, the amount of energy is not cut in half, it is cut by a factor of 4. So the further away your microphone is from a sound source, the tinier and more awful it's going to be. You need to have your microphones up there close to the people who are speaking. And this applies to light as well. I just have several examples of camera in the back of the sanctuary, webcasting the entire time with the wide view, or maybe having it up in the balcony. You know, this is acceptable in some ways. It's a surveillance video shot, but it's not really interesting for people to focus on the essence of what's going on. When you watching this guy preach a sermon from, 50 feet away, really isn't that good an experience on screen. Now, I also mentioned it's very hard to get good shot of the congregation if you have multiple cameras. This is Trinity. This is from one of our older webcasts. This was actually a pretty decent attendance for us, but it looks empty. It looks a little better when everybody's standing up and singing, but it's very hard to get a shot of a church that doesn't look like mostly empty pews. Why? Nobody sits in the front pews. And I will tell you, when you produce a show, like the Oscars, you may not know this, but they have seat fillers. So if somebody gets up and goes to the bathroom, they have a paid seat filler that comes down and sits in their seat, so there is not an empty seat on camera. And I guarantee you that the big televangelists, they also have seat fillers. They have a lot of effort that goes into having the seats filled. I don't know what you do about that other than recruit people to sit in the front pews, but it is just a very hard thing to do. And then there are also a couple of legal issues we'll talk about in a minute. Framing, you can go online and learn basic photographic framing. The first thing I'll say that everybody ought to learn that is doing this is the rule of thirds. I'm not going to get into this too deeply right now, but you can learn this on your own. You can go out on the internet and you can Google rule of thirds, that the items of interest need to be along one of those lines in a well-composed picture. And in television in particular, and our webcasting, we also will tend to put titles down here. And in the TV business, those are called a lower third. So if you want to say this is Reverend Joe Blow, that's going to go down here in the lower third, and you need to not have his face down there and cover up his face. So there's you can learn that. Legal issues. Mike mentioned copyright. This is an enormous pain, and it's an enormous pain to me, even though I've got a lot of experience dealing with copyright issues. In our copyright workshop the other day, I said I spend 15 or 20 minutes every Sunday night contesting the YouTube flags for our copyright violations on our stuff. We don't do anything that's not legal, but the bots out there flag it as illegal, and I have to prove to them that we have a license to do that. Streaming adds a whole extra level of copyright issues. You have to have the proper licenses to use music and other copyrighted stuff, visuals, and you need to display the copyright and license notices. I think I got one right here. Yeah, here's right before a hymn on our webcast. We'll put up the title, we'll put up the information on who wrote it, and we put up our license that gives us permission to use that. And we do that every time we're using copyrighted music. Now, the interesting thing is the YouTube bots can't read, apparently. So this is something, but it's something that gives you proof that we've got the proper license to do this. And with CCLI and one license, you are required to put it in a proper format while the song is being sung. Notice of cameras. In my workshops in the past, one of the things, I mean, the way I thought of to explain this is there is a tiny, tiny chance that someone who's in the witness protection program is going to come and worship at your church. Yes, it's a very tiny chance, but if that happens, you could ruin somebody's life by getting a shot of them and so on. Much more likely is you have people in your congregation who do not like being photographed and are very sensitive about being photographed and are going to be irrationally angry that you put a shot of them up on the internet. That's actually much more likely than the other. But you need to think about both of those. You need to have a notice in your bulletin that says we are webcasting the service. And I always recommend that churches design a space where they do not photograph, either a balcony or a back corner or something, so that if somebody does not want to be on camera, they have a place they can go sit and worship and trust that they're not going to be photographed. Children, I love doing children's sermons. We have our children's chat. You have to have permission from the parents to webcast the kids. And you have to be careful about what you include. One of the things that can happen is that children will say something that's a little too much detail, a little too much information about where they live. We are very careful to cut all that stuff out. Now, it's really hard to edit live when you're having a children's sermon when we're all back together. But I would say that if we had something that got said during a children's sermon that was too sensitive, I would be going and cutting it out of the webcast and not having that up on the internet for anybody to watch down the road. So children introduce a whole other issue. All right, I'm going to stop here and let's, that was a lot of information to dump on everybody. But now that we got past that, let's have some questions and some areas that you'd like to talk about. And Mike and I can certainly do our best to pretend like we know the answers. So I see somebody said we should get cardboard cutouts of the congregation members like they have for curling and football events now. Yes, that's cool. I'll tell you, I don't have a picture of it, I'm sorry. In my living room where we videotape my sermons, and we tape everything in advance. We have a different, my wife has a collection of nutcrackers. So we have a different nutcracker on screen every week. And after they are on screen, then they go to a table behind the camera, and it's growing to be this, what I call the great cloud of witnesses. We have almost, I think, we've got almost 50 nutcrackers that are there, and they're my congregation that I preach to every week. So same kind of idea.
Like that. I have a question. Sorry, Melanie. I work with Aaron.
Yeah.
One question I have is, when we look to do in person and online, is there a way you can help us figure out how to connect the speakers that are in the sanctuary up with the Sling Studio that we use, so it's not an echo? Like, that's what we're trying to figure out too. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. The handout that you'll all be getting as a PDF has a little section on that. And very briefly, the best way for you to get your audio into your web stream is through your mixer, if you already have a mixer set up. There's some thought that needs to go into that, because there's a little difference between sound reinforcement and sound recording as to what you want to include. You probably need to add a microphone to pick up the congregation. Many churches do not have that. But there's an output from your mixer. I just recently ran into a church that had every output of the mixer already used, and I had to explain to their tech guy how to put a distribution amp to multiply the number of outputs they had. But you can pull the output of the mixer and feed it into your Sling Studio. The problem, and there's some links for this on that sheet, because this is a question that comes up all the time. The output of your mixer is what's called line level, which is a higher voltage than microphone level. And most cameras and items like the Sling Studio are set up for microphone level. So it's a very easy fix, but they're not easy to find. You need what's called an attenuating cable. And I have some links as to where to buy them. Used to be something that every town had a Radio Shack, and you could go to Radio Shack, and every Radio Shack had these for $10. Radio Shack's gone, and everything has to be ordered over the internet. That's specialty these days. So and I was amazed when this first came up, when I was helping some other churches with this, how hard these are to find. But I do have some links that you can buy them. That's the crucial ingredient from going from your mixer into the camera. Okay. So good question.
John, I will add too that this is sort of higher level stuff, but sometimes how you mix for your room is different than how you mix for what's going out over video. So it's going to sound a little different. The microphones will sound really strong. The congregation will sound not so strong. If you have mics in your choir, you'll have to, get whoever's running your sound. Although I know a lot of congregations have set up their sound 20 years ago and they haven't touched any of the knobs on it.
Right.
But you may need to play with that. But the key, as John said, was if you've already got sound reinforcement in your sanctuary, find a way to pull the audio off of that instead of trying to use the audio on whatever camera you're using.
One of the early things we did 10 years ago when we set up the Webcast at Trinity was that we actually have a secondary mixer. We have a little tiny tabletop mixer, and we have the congregation microphones feed into that one. The main sound panel feeds into that as well, so we can mix together the singing of the congregation, the responses of the congregation with the guy up front or the gal up front, whoever it is. And that's specifically for the webcast, so that it's balanced. But other questions?
Sorry, I was going to ask you, John, right? Would you mind sending Aaron a picture of what you were just talking about with the two mixers that you have, just so I can kind of get an idea of what you're talking about? Okay, thank you.
I can do that. I'm going to have to take notes here, or I'll never remember.
Yeah, I kind of wish I had a camera down in my basement, because I've got that little mixer. I know exactly what John is talking about. They're not expensive. You can get them for under $100, and they really do help. because they
Yeah.
give you an opportunity to set levels the way you want them to be set.
Yeah.
And
Especially if the Sling Studio is a great solution. I'm very impressed with that as a turnkey solution. But so you need to have as good audio as it's giving you video.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Okay. Thank you.
to do. Sure. Other questions?
John, one quick comment. This is Nola. Somebody posted in the chat about asking the pastor to repeat the names of prayer requests being said during the service. I've been asking people not to do that for privacy reasons.
Yes.
Does that for broadcasting, webcasting, don't have people speak those things or put it in something that you're going to cut out? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a whole insider versus outsider thing, and privacy issues are really important. If you are a congregation that has time to holler out prayer requests, does Aunt Millie really want everybody to know in the world to know what kind of cancer she has? And she didn't give permission for that. So yeah, I would be really careful about that. We actually, what we do at Trinity is we actually have the prayer list that's as in the PDF that people can download separately, but we've gotten permission from everybody to put it on there so that we're not, just sticking a name on there because somebody else asked it. We have to ask the person. So privacy issues remember, you are going from 100 people or 80 people or whatever your congregation is, who all know each other, to putting this out there on the internet, on YouTube or wherever, that anybody can see and can see 5 years from now. So this is a whole different venue. There were probably a number of other privacy issues. I know I mentioned the children. You need to be really sure the parents know their child is going to be on the internet, because we've got parents that will not allow their kids to participate because of that, and because they're just creeped out by that, even though we're quite careful about what information we put out about them. So.
And folks are pretty cavalier about that kind of stuff because they show their pictures of their kids on Facebook all the time. They figure, what's the big deal? You really do need to ask. I spent my earlier part of my career with Crayola, and when we started doing anything online, it was all about being very, very careful. We have a question.
Yeah, did y'all know he used to work for Crayola?
Yep, crayons were a big part of my life. Actually, my daughter, if you look behind me, all this artwork back here, this is my daughter. She's a comic book artist now. I think that's partly because the house was filled with crayons and pencils and markers. Anytime something new came out, my kids have been in Crayola marketing materials. I have actually a picture that I took of my daughter Natalie that I found on slide of her eating a crayon for a session that I was doing. So she doesn't let me live that one down, but she's the one that's the artist now, so we can
John,
that's that one slide.
Yes.
John, I have a comment too about the showing of the children. We had the policy of getting permissions from the parents and also not putting their children's names if we were showing it in a newsletter and things like that. However, a social worker member of ours pointed something out. And so what he was telling us is, if you have a predator coming into the church and has seen online or in a newsletter the face of a child, all he has to do is see that child, and all of a sudden he makes the connection. So you don't need the name. It's very dangerous, and it's sad to say, but putting children's pictures anywhere is, if you're going to do a children's chat, I would suggest that you focus on the person giving the chat, not the kids, because it's easy to find them.
Yeah, well, that is true, and this is stuff that we had discussed in terms of our usage, and we discussed with the parents, and the parents make the decision. We were very careful to cut out anything that they say that reveals kind of where they live or what they did last week or anything else. So yeah, there's a line you need to draw somewhere. And every congregation is going to have to make that decision themselves.
And
but I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, again, you really do need to be careful. And you got to also remember too, that bringing your service online changes a lot of things. We had talked about this in our copyright session last week, that you know, there's an exclusion to the copyright in the copyright code that allows you to perform or read or do any kind of copyrighted material in your church building. Once you put it online, all bets are off. You need to make sure that you get permission to use any of that kind of stuff. So it may change how you do your services. It may change how you do that.
And that distinction continues at another level, in that you can include, for instance, the CCLI license and so on, allows you to include that piece of music in a worship service, but not if you take it out separately and put it like in a concert or by itself. And this actually every music publisher we talked to about this has brought that up. So you're licensing for a worship service, not another usage. So
right. There's a question here from Carol asking how to incorporate recorded and live material in your service. That requires some software. That requires some hardware to be able to do that kind of thing. I mean, Zoom has a rudimentary way to do that, where you can share slides and share music and things like that. I use a piece of software called OBS, which is Open Broadcaster Software. It's actually free. It takes a little time to learn how to use it. That gives you that opportunity to put those things together. But you have to have some way of mixing it together. I mean, I've seen some folks where they'll just take their camera and point it up to a screen to show it, or put a microphone up to a speaker. But you need to have it's just like television production. You have to have a way to mix it all together. One of the things that I found, Sling Studio actually gives you an opportunity to do this kind of stuff. There's a unit that I found. It's a small switcher. Now, I have a background in television. I went to school for it. So I remember, if you've ever seen the Death Star scenes in Star Wars, where they have those big things with all the buttons on them, and that's actually a video mixer.
It's a Grass Valley switcher.
Grass Valley switcher, yeah. But so what this unit does is it lets you plug in a bunch of different cameras, and you can even plug in the output from your computer, and then just push buttons to switch in between them, and then use that as your way of getting things out. But Carol, you need some way to switch stuff to be able to do that. Again, Zoom gives us an opportunity to do that. I could pop right in here right now and play a slide presentation, which you've seen us do. I can play music through here and things like that. So Zoom gives you a basic ability to do that. If you want to take it to the next level, you've got to look into some higher end things.
Let me stop, and I'll say on the handout there is a link to a couple of different units, like he's just talking about hardware units where you can fade and switch to different sources. Let me put a plug in for OBS. It's the online broadcast studio. This is a phenomenal piece of free software. It wasn't that good when it was new, but it has developed. It's open source software. And frankly, it does everything that any church I've ever encountered needs. Some of them have a learning curve to it. I mean, it does have a learning curve. You've got to learn how to use it. But it is for webcasting. It actually started off as a way for gamers to stream their games live. And it's still very good at that, but I'm not a gamer, so I do worship services. But OBS, if you haven't picked a software to use, OBS is great for even single camera setups, because it allows you to put titling on and graphics, and it allows you to play back previously recorded video and so on.
Actually, John, if I could, let me just, I've got a little OBS setup here in my office. So
right.
Let me just see if I can make this do it. Now, we did not test this. So I'm breaking one of John's big rules right now. But if we go here, you should now see, if I did this correctly, you should now see a shot of my desk. If I click here, you now see me again.
Nope.
Click here. No, it's not. That's not
working. Not working.
Okay, let me try one more time. Oh, wait. That's because I didn't do it right.
User error.
Yeah. All right. OBS virtual camera. There we go. Now, using OBS, I can switch to,
Yeah.
if I wanted to demonstrate this little camera here, I could do that. If I wanted to put a PowerPoint presentation up, I just click there.
Yeah.
Click here, there's a third camera, although not very well set up. You can see the rest of my office. So this is OBS, and what it allows you to do is switch between a bunch of different cameras. And the neat thing is, it's as John said, it's open source. It's free, and it takes a little learning how to use. And here I'll come back to myself here. I think I did that right. And the other neat thing that it does is it automatically streams to wherever you want to go. So I can connect that to YouTube Live and stream to there if I wanted to. So it's neat stuff. The other thing I'll say too is that I use a bunch of old video cameras that have the output that let me just plug them into my computer using inexpensive little cards that plug into the USB port. So suddenly I've got access to all these different cameras and things like that. Lots of, as I said, the technology is constantly changing. Lots of fun ways to do that. So OBS, as John said, is something that I would, if I were you, I would definitely take a look into.
Yeah, I'm sharing a screenshot from OBS, and this is set up in studio mode where we can see the program on one side and the preview of the next camera you're going to cut to. Just, I don't know if seeing a screenshot is really that helpful, but it shows you. So it is something worth checking out. And of course, as a church on a budget, the price is the thing that's kind of magical, because some of the other software is pretty expensive. So.
And Hopton's asking, how does OBS compare with MediaShoutout or Pro Presenter? They're completely different pieces of software.
Yeah.
Now, the neat thing is, I found this out just this week. Pro Presenter and MediaShoutout, if you don't know what they are, they were initially designed for projecting at your church. Pro Presenter and MediaShoutout make that easier. If you know how, I mean, I've always found them to be far more difficult to use than PowerPoint, but they do the trick. Both of those now have streaming components to them, where you can stream from Pro Presenter or from, but Hopton, they're completely different pieces of software. OBS is really the video presenting part of it.
Right. So you can be using one of those or PowerPoint to project stuff in your sanctuary and have the output fed to OBS and mix that in with the cameras you're using. So there's, but they are very different. Other questions?
Don't be shy. That's what we're here for.
Oh.
Yeah, I have a question. It's Candace Weiss from East Hills Moravian Church. I'm finding it a little overwhelming with like all of the churches that are doing like live stream options. And I'm finding it hard to like even focus on like all the services that I want to view. It seems like they're all happening at the same time, between like 10 a.m. and noon. So I'm feeling a little disconnected from like my own congregation, and just feeling like overwhelmed at the glut of choices. How do we combat that like glut of choices so that we don't lose people and just kind of, ignore the fact that we're still connected to each other as a congregation?
That's a hard question. I mentioned the time shifting, and I do think it's really, really important to have these up so that people can watch them later. Because of that, I know most churches are very, very focused on doing live streaming, and I don't know really how important that is. Is it that important to have it at exactly 11 o'clock? One of the things you can do is do a service at 11, record it and upload it afterwards and have it available. And I don't think most people would have a problem with that. The number, we are now overwhelmed with this tsunami of choices all the time. And I don't really have a solution to that. I will tell you though, that one of the things we've very intentionally done at Trinity is to involve as many people as possible in doing liturgy and reading scripture, in music and so on, because people will tune in if their grandchild is singing. I mean, just frankly. So one of the aspects of engagement is to make sure that there are people on screen that they want to see and whom they know. And one of the interesting things is I've had a lot of feedback from people that they felt over this last year, you know, like they actually saw Joe, because Joe read the scriptures and it connected them, even though they haven't physically been in the same room with Joe for a year. So it helps in feeling connected. And when we started off, my board said, "Oh, well, you're an interesting speaker. You just point the camera at yourself for 20 minutes and that'd be great." And I said, it's not about me. So it needs to also be about other people in your congregation. And that is actually why we made the decisions we did, including the kids, because of the connectedness it provides. So I don't know if that helped at all.
Yeah, and I do understand that there are just so many choices out there. If you're trying to make it so that folks tune into yours, the key is to make it as engaging as possible. To make it something that you know, use sort of the same thoughts that you would to how would you get people in the doors to your church. But folks, what I'm finding is they have limited tolerance for things that don't look that great online, unless they are vested in it. If you're trying to bring new people in, your stuff's got to look pretty good. If they're folks that are already in your church, they're more than likely going to tune in. But you know, if the service feels stiff or is you know, hard to watch, you know, will that connection stay? I don't think so. So that's another reason why you want to try to, if you're going to do this, if you're going to commit to being to streaming as well as doing the service in-house, you want to make sure that those services are sharp, that they really are something. Because you will get the folks that are part of your congregation wanting to see what you're doing. That's I mean, you've got that built-in audience. If you're looking to bring other folks in, you've got to make it look pretty good. So it'd be meaningful. I mean, it's so much more than, and John hit on this before, it's so much more than the look good and sound good. There's got to be engaging content there as well. It's got to be a service that folks want to hear. You know, and now I've been with the church for 11 years. I have yet to hear a bad Moravian sermon. Hopefully, you know, I'll never be in a church where I hear a bad one. So we have really good folks that do a really good job with this stuff. It's just a matter of making sure that what you're presenting to the world is worth watching. You know, TV worth watching. Whose was that? Was that CBS or NBC, or I can't remember who that was.
Hang around, Mike. You'll hear a bad one once in a while.
Yeah. Maybe if I start watching more of them online, I will. But yeah, you want to make it something that's worthwhile and meaningful. So
yeah. Well, that's the content issue, and thinking how people react. One of the things, my wife has always wanted to be a mystery church shopper. And there are a couple of services that do that you know, they have the mystery worshiper and write up a report of what the experience was like at this church, because most churches are really very bad at being actually welcoming to new people. This is a pre-pandemic problem that's gone on for a long time. Our congregations think of themselves as very friendly, but they are not friendly to new people. And so that's actually something that every church needs to look at anyway. But have somebody else, you know, somebody who's not in your church, somebody who's not a Moravian, view one of your live streams and make notes and tell you what they didn't understand, what left them cold, what irritated them, and so on. That is really valuable knowledge. And it's not that hard to do. So it's a good idea. Carol Daig posted, they have a video program at one of the local high schools, and this might be a source for finding a person who can help these things get set up even for a small payment. Actually, I think that this is an interesting way to include some people who might not be interested in other things about church. We have a couple of our webcasters who just didn't show much interest until they got on the webcast list, and they like technology and they enjoy doing that. So asking for volunteers is really important, and getting as many people involved is important. It's also important for what Mike calls the hit by a bus theory, right, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell them the hit by a bus theory.
We call it, I have an engineer friend who has this, he calls it the bus factor. And what that is however you have something set up, what would happen if the person that runs it got hit by a bus? Now, not that they were killed, but that they wouldn't be able to be there on Sunday. That's the way I try to look at it. He got a little more graphic with it than I do, but it's the bus factor. You need to make sure that whatever you've got set up is something that is easy enough, or you have the folks to be able to come in and run it. If your video guy gets sick on Friday and can't be there for Sunday, do you have someone who can do it? Make sure that you've got the training in there. As John said, this kind of experience, the ability to come in and produce something like this is a good way to bring someone in who may not be so much into may not come to church on their own, except maybe at Christmas or Easter, but this gets them in there every Sunday, because it gives them something to contribute and something to be able to do, to build a team around, build a team of people that can do this kind of stuff. So yeah, the bus factor is just make sure that whatever you create, that you can continue if that one person that does it isn't able to be there. The other thing, and I say this whenever anybody's looking to do anything technical, or even start a newsletter or do something, communication-wise at their church, is this something that you see yourself doing 3 months from now? Is this something that you know that you'll be able to resource? Because there's nothing worse than setting all of this stuff up, and then not far down the road, the crickets are chirping. Mm-hmm. And you just throw your hands up and say, we don't want to do it anymore. So as you're looking at expanding or doing more, you just want to make sure that, yes, you may have the budget to put the system into the first place. You may have the training to get people up and running, but can you continue it? So that's, it's something, again, not specifically a video issue, but something that you need to think about if you're going to embark on this.
So Cindy Martin posted that their church is continuing to have worship exactly the same way, including every element, even though it's being broadcast through YouTube. And it feels very stiff at home. And this is what I'm saying about the long dead spots in most services, that we're just not used to seeing dead air on television. And this is more like television. And is there a way to have more participatory worship? And let me just throw out a couple of ideas that we've tried, and a couple that we haven't tried yet but are thinking about. Once we got into this whole pandemic situation, we had a whole bunch of things that we always do that we couldn't do anymore, such as honor the graduates. We always give our graduates a Love Feast mug and a throw rug to take with them off to college. Well, we couldn't do that with them gathered up front. So we took a camera and we went to their house and we made the presentation on their front porch with everybody wearing masks. And then we edited that in so that everybody got to see that happen. So now that's not technically kind of participatory in the moment. It takes a lot of trouble to set it up, but it gives everybody the feeling that they were there while it happened. And there's a lot of things like that we can do. We have the question, we've had folks join the church over the last year, but we haven't been able to do that Moravian thing of singing the hymn and shaking their hands and all that. So we're kind of thinking about what can we do like that. And it may involve having the board come and meet them outside and videotaping it, including it in service. I'm not sure what we're going to do yet, but there are a lot of ways that you can do that. And I guarantee you there is some college student or some high school student in your congregation that would love to run the camera for you and, or run the cell phone for you or whatever to help you videotape something like that, and then include it in your service. So that's one way you can do it. Another thing is the whole theme of just interactive worship in general, participatory worship. you know, and this is something, for a long time we had an alternate service called Evensong, and that focused on participatory things like, you know, writing your sins on a piece of paper and then burning them, putting a nail into a cross as part of a kind of liturgy together, things that involve getting up and doing something. You can do those things with folks at home. You have to tell them in advance so they have the required stuff, but you can ask them to do those things at home so they're actually participating. And we've done everything we can to make sure that they participate in the liturgy. They don't just sit and watch it. So participation is still a possibility.
We all carry one of these. These all have killer video cameras in them.
Yes.
Actually, I do a class where I teach how it's so simple to get good video on one of these, as long as you hold it in the right way, the right place, and suddenly your entire congregation has a way of sharing what they're doing, or how they're doing it. So you've always got that in your pocket to be able to do that. John, I did want to share, because I know we're beginning to run out of time, but I did want to share a resource that you were talking about, framing and shooting and things like that. This is a book that I recommend to anyone who's ever considering doing video. I'm a little embarrassed by the title of the book, but it's by a fellow named Steve Stockman, and it's How to Shoot Video That Doesn't Suck. Doesn't get much easier than that in terms of, you know what this book is about. But what it does is it walks you through. This is mainly about shooting and editing video, but it also has a lot of good information in here. The great thing is it's a $13.95 book, and it's a great place to start. I will also recommend John's book. You mentioned it earlier. I have the 3rd edition. I have not yet bought the 4th edition, but I have a signed copy of the 3rd edition because I know the author.
Well, and here is my book.
Yep. Oh, and a picture of him showing his book. Yep. It's terrific stuff. But again, the resources are definitely out there. I will also recommend that YouTube and Google are your friends in this. They will, well, that's a double-edged sword, because you can also really go down the rabbit hole with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But on the technical side, there are plenty of resources out there to help you do that. I will also offer too that if you've got questions after this meeting, I'm an email away. I can always hop on Zoom, and if you've got questions on the kinds of things that you're doing, happy to be able to help. Just trying to look through the chat here because it's going by very quickly. If you've got some other questions from folks. Let's see here.
Amy Lindell wants to be a paid seat filler.
There we go. There we go.
Actually, you can get that gig pretty easily if you live in LA or New York.
Yeah, she's in Edmonton, Washington.
Yeah,
she's in Edmonton. Doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
I will bring to your attention in this fall that on Moravian.org, we've been posting quite a few resources for folks to be able to use in their services, either in person or streaming online. We have backgrounds for slide presentations. We've got a number of Lenten, and we'll soon have Easter hymns recorded that you'll be able to use if you wanted to use them for your services. Texts for our public domain hymns that you'll be able to get your hands on and be able to use. I invite you to visit Moravian.org and look under the COVID-19 resources page. There's all kinds of stuff there that can help with the services that you'll be doing now and into the future. We've had these up since last spring, but we're adding more and more now as we go through. So if you're looking for, if you're looking for a way to make it either visually more appealing or you need some music for your services, they are there. And they're, yes, they are. We've supplied only the public domain pieces, so that the ones that we provide are ones that you can use freely. So I will point that out.
And let me extend that a little bit. There are a number of sites out on the internet, and I'm not going to be able to reel any of them off, but folks who have done recordings of public domain hymns on the organ and on the piano and so on that you can use in your service as long as it's non-commercial use. So if you go out and Google that, you'll find a number of resources for that kind of stuff. In our copyright workshop, we also mentioned that there are now, we are blessed now with a number of wonderful sites for the Creative Copyright License released photos and videos. Unsplash is one, Pixabay is another, Pexels.com is another, and these are usually like the extra photographs from a shoot that a photographer didn't use for the commercial thing, and they've got all this extra stuff. And they'll make it available for you to use for non-commercial stuff. You don't even have to credit it. And the good thing is that I can prove that I got it from a decent source, I mean the right source, and it's, you know, it's not a copyright violation. So if you sign up for those, I think all of those services will actually provide you a downloadable list of everything you downloaded and who did it, so that you have kind of record of what you've used. But there's a lot of beautiful resources out there. And Mike's always reminding people that you can take your camera around your church and take some really interesting close-ups of architectural features and crosses and Love Feast mugs, and you know, if you've got interesting pot that the Love Feast coffee gets made in, you know, get a picture of that. There's a lot of interesting stuff around your church that you can use as visuals for some of these things.
Create your own. And that's, again, I did that once at Castleton Hill. Was doing a workshop there for the Staten Island churches, and during a break, I just ran around and with my little pocket camera. They have a beautiful. The backdrop is like a glass tile on the back of their sanctuary, and just beautiful. They have windows in the back of the church that have the seal etched into them, and just took a few minutes with that camera, just grabbed a couple of shots. Those are all things that make great backgrounds for your slide presentations. They make great pieces for promoting your services on Facebook, and they're ones that you don't have to worry about the copyright on, because you took them, they're yours,
right.
And they're free to use. Yeah, always the tools that we have in our hands right now. I remember when, and I don't want to sound like I've been around for too long, but I remember when I graduated from college, I went to the UK to shoot the Madrigal Choir and Chamber Orchestra for my college. The camera I took with me was in a case that probably weighed 75 pounds. And it was actually separate from the recorder that we used. The video that I can get on my phone now blows away anything I could have gotten on that camera back then. So, you know, the tools that we have at our disposal now are remarkable. Just taking some time to learn how to use them and put them to use, you'd be amazed at what we can do nowadays. So.
I'm thinking about the interactivity mode. I think this is something that pastors and boards ought to put a lot of thought into now, in fresh thought. I mean, if you had told me, let's go back 2 years, if you told me that we were going to be doing virtual communion, I would have said not a chance ever. I mean, this has come up and the bishops had said no. And, you know, the idea that we're doing virtual communion now still blows my mind. But I'm told by the people at home that they have a pretty profound experience, and they, you know, I've had some weird things being used for communion, Tostitos, you know, orange soda, but the idea and the core idea of asking your people to be prepared to do something during the service while they're watching somebody else do it or talk about it has a lot of legs to it, and you can do a lot of different things that way. And I think that level of engagement is something that's profound, and we need to be doing in the services, in the in-person services as well. So any other questions? Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you're worried about, or that you have a pet peeve about? But anybody want to argue with me about doing vertical video?
I mean, I'll argue John Blood in the face, but I don't really care about that. I agree with you.
Amy's saying shut up.
Yes.
Well,
You
if
know,
they're
I would-
already, oh, go ahead.
I'm going to just build on something that John had talked about earlier. If you're looking at ways to improve what you're doing, have someone from outside of your congregation, have someone who has never been to your church, have someone who may never have come to church, watch your service online and have them give you feedback. Let them know that you're looking to improve. Tell us what you think should change. I think that is a terrific idea, John. Is to have it's much easier to do the secret worshiper online than it is to have someone pop into your church. But I think that's a terrific idea because you will find ways to improve, and you may find too. What I love about this stuff is that creating something like this can be a hassle, but it can also be a lot of fun. It gives a new energy and a new opportunity to do things while you're still doing church. So keep that in mind too. That yes, this may be a budget expense, this may be a hassle, but at the same time, this is something that can be really exciting and a new chapter for your church. Yeah,
let me piggyback on that. Our local NPR affiliate has a program they do in the summer called Radio Camp. And it originally was just for high school kids. Now they've expanded it to include adults too. And you sign up and you get a little basic course on how to produce an audio radio story. And you go out, you learn how to edit it and everything. And we've had a couple kids being involved in that went out and created really great stories that got broadcast. And I can't tell you how much energy there was around that. You can do the same thing with cell phones and asking your kids to either interview somebody, tell a story, what's going on in the neighborhood, and all of that kind of thing. The energy that comes out of that and the number of people who will watch it are pretty big. And so that's thinking outside the box. Somebody asked if the two of us would go to a road show. We're both accessible by email or telephone or whatever you need. And yeah, I think we'd both be willing to answer questions. I don't know if we can necessarily come to your place, although if we worked out something, we might be able to. I told Mike when I was looking at resources, I rather quickly found several paid courses for how to set up webcasting at your church. And I said, man, we ought to go into business together, $200 a pop to watch this video. Right. So I would encourage you not to spend $200 on a video, but do something else and ask me and Mike questions if you need help.
And as you can see, I am coming to you from this yellow bedroom. I've been here, since
all year,
March 13th of 2020. But virtually I can visit anywhere. Now I'm really hopeful that by the summertime I'll be, or hopefully maybe by the fall, if I want to be a little more realistic, that I'll be able to travel once again and get out there and meet with folks and take a look around. But yes, I'm always accessible here. If you have questions, if you want to just shoot me an email, set up a quick Zoom call or a phone call, be happy to help any way that I can. So, and yes, if you want to pay us $200, make a check out to IBOC or to John Jackman or Trinity Moravian Church, and we would certainly appreciate that. But that's not what we're here for. If you need our help, let us know.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for our presenters before we close out today?
Amy asked a very important question in the chat. John and Mike, do you accept bribes of baked goods?
Yes.
Yes. So my wife and I have been doing Weight Watchers, and we haven't baked anything in a month and a half. So yes, there's a box of Girl Scout cookies that are just waiting to be devoured. Maybe I'll treat myself after this one here, because she's at the office, so maybe I'll do that. But yes, baked goods are definitely one of those things that I will just tell a real quick story. My birthday was a couple of weeks ago. It was snowing like mad as the sun came up, and I got a phone call from my assistant Jill saying, look on your front porch. She had driven over a hot baked apple pie for my birthday and left it on my front porch. That's the last baked good that I ate.
Oh
so,
my.
Yes. Although there's still a piece in the freezer, so we have to go back to it.
I'm afraid that I've been doing the opposite during pandemic. My daughter's been baking stuff and I've been eating it. So, all right. Okay, just let me remind everybody that we're accessible by passenger pigeon, by email, by tin can and a string. You can all get in touch with us. I will send around to everybody a few more answers to questions that I think about, and maybe a picture of our setup at Trinity so you can see how that works. I would just, I don't think that what we're doing at Trinity is right for every congregation. We record everything in advance, and it's edited and uploaded, and then it gets triggered at 11 o'clock as a premiere. But I would encourage you to come watch one of our services just to see the different ideas that have been included. They've come from a variety of different people, and some of them work better than others, but it will give you some ideas. And then you'll get to see at least one of our nutcrackers. So.
Well, John and Mike, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. Before we hop off here, we just want to remind everyone that paid registrants will receive an email within 2 weeks of the end of Leadership Focus that will contain a recording of this session along with other helpful resources and materials in our other sessions. So you can find additional Leadership Focus workshop information on Moravianbcum.org. So thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone. It's good to see everybody.